Thanks for pitching up this morning. We'd like to welcome and introduce Evan Shaw. Evan, again, and I think we're starting to be outnumbered here by the Rhodians. So Evan, Adrian was also a Rhodian. I think Dave Apter, who spoke a couple of weeks ago, Jock Harmer, who's on the call and been lecturing there. So good to see all of these, and then we're missing Keith Kenyon, your mate, Evan.
Yep.
Okay, so thanks, Evan. Evan spent most of his life in the limestone stroke cement business, and he did give us a talk previously on the local cement industry and what's been going on here. And today he's going to talk about his experiences and ventures into Pakistan, where I think the basic sort of reason for being there was, again, to look at limestone and possibly build a cement factory. But thanks, Evan. Over to you.
Guys, I'll ask you to put your videos and your mics on mute, please.
Sorry.
Okay, don't forget to record.
That, please.
Thank you. It's on recording.
Okay.
Go.
All right. Okay. Well, good morning, guys. The last couple of weeks, on a Thursday, we have been listening to extremely technical papers, geological or whatever, but very, very technical papers. And the news is I'm about to change that. We are not having a highly technical paper today. It's more about travel, more about country than all the technical side of things. All right, the first question really comes about as to why the heck was Pakistan? So I'll try to cover that a little bit and then talk about the geological reconnaissance that we did in Pakistan, and then establishing the project over there, then the geological exploration and the raw material evaluation we did. Then I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about Pakistan in general. I found it a very, very fascinating country. Then look briefly at the feasibility study. It's not the main objective of this talk, but we had to do this feasibility study. I'll talk briefly about that. And then also what the current status of that feasibility and the project is. So let's start. Why Pakistan? Well, as John just mentioned, I've spent pretty much all my life in the cement industry. In 2013, I just completed a feasibility study for a new company in South Africa. It was called Sopaku Cement. And this, by the way, was the very first new entrant into the South African cement market since 1934. So there weren't a lot of people clamoring to get into our cement market. So that had just been completed, and I was at a bit of a loose end. And one of the guys that had sponsored that feasibility phoned me up one day just after this and said, how would you like to visit Pakistan? Well, I won't tell you my answer straight away, but the reason for that was that in 2013 odd, Pakistan and China had started a negotiation on an economic corridor through Pakistan. And in anticipation of this potential economic upturn in Pakistan, I was asked to go to Pakistan and look at a feasibility study for a new cement plant located in Pakistan. Now, eventually in April of 2015, it's a bit later, China and Pakistan eventually announced the signing of this agreement to construct this economic corridor through Pakistan. And it was planned to link China and Pakistan. And the estimated cost of this project was $46 billion US. The project name was the CPEC, which became known as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Give you an idea of what that looks like. This is Pakistan in the sort of greeny color here, China up in the pink on top. And the idea was that China would take over a port in the Arabian Sea. The port's name was Khewra. And China would pay for the upgrading of that port. And then a whole series of rail, road, pipeline links would be constructed right through Pakistan into China, a place called Kashgar. Now, the total distance of that is 2,700 kilometers. And perhaps interesting to note as well, this little gray area here, that is, of course, the Kashmir province. Now, if you've ever listened to news recently or whatever, you will know that Kashmir is one of the real disputed provinces. India claims it, China claims it, Pakistan claims it, etc. So this corridor was also going to go straight through that, and of course straight through half of the Himalayan mountains on that side. Just to talk a little bit about this corridor, CPEC, the advantages for Pakistan are obviously the economic activity along the corridor and all the infrastructure, etc., that would be built to support this corridor. A lot of that would have been or is hydroelectric power stations and various other things. So a lot of economic activity was planned to take place in Pakistan. And the advantages of this corridor for China would be a link down to that warm water port of Gwadar in southern Pakistan. And this new route through Pakistan, it's going to shorten the current sea route between the Middle East and China by a huge amount. I'll just show you an idea of that. If you look over here, you'll see this obviously Middle East down this side, the proposed corridor going straight through here, and the old route, sea route to China has to go all the way around through the Straits of Malacca, Hapati-Tapati, up to Beijing. So a lot further, and the idea was this was going to shorten that route by a huge amount. So you can see a really big advantage in this thing for China. So in August of 2013, I undertook my very first trip to Pakistan. And the objective was really to try to locate some suitable raw materials for cement manufacture, somewhere close to where this proposed economic corridor route was going to go. And then to apply for an exploration or a mining right over that area. Now, we came back and did obviously quite a lot of research into Pakistan geology, and eventually decided that the best place to try and look for materials would be an area situated up towards the northeast of Pakistan, situated between Islamabad and Lahore. Islamabad lies up top here, that's the capital, and Lahore down here. And it's an area that was known as the Salt Range. And I'll talk a little bit about the name and a bit more about the range later. So that turned out to be the area that we were targeting. The reason that we were looking at that was, if you look at the geology of that area, it's all very recent. We're not used to this sort of recent geology. And we were interested in particular in this Charak formation and two zones there. The one is called the Sakazar limestone and the other one, the Namal limestone. They're all both about 40, 50 to 70 meters in thickness. And they were both young, early Eocene in age, about 56 odd to 47 million years old. Now in South Africa, if we're looking at any primary type limestones in this country, we would be looking possibly in the Malmani, in the Dolomites areas for something, and now we're talking about 4.5 billion years old. So a very big difference in age of the sort of material that we would be looking into. The Salt Range itself, this is a bit more detail of it, is about 300 kilometers long. And possibly the interesting thing there was, it was supposedly, first of all, mentioned or discovered by Alexander the Great. Now we're going into way BC here. And apparently Alexander the Great, in one of his sojourns into Europe, camped in this area. And they were very confused by all the horses licking the rock. Eventually discovered why the horses were licking the rock. All the rock was salt. So hence the name Salt Range, and we'll talk a little bit more about the salt later. So the area of interest for us was this front zone here, which lies along the Salt Range thrust. We'll talk about that. If you look at this topography here, the area we were interested in lies on this area here between all these rivers, and you can see it's a nicely elevated plateau. That's the range of mountains. And the rest of it going all the way down to sea is pretty low-lying and flat area. So our target area, the range of mountains up there. The reason that it's there, of course, is because of this, the whole Indian plate motion, the collision between this Indian plate and the Eurasian plate, and the subduction zone along its borders. Geologically, of course, this area structurally is quite complex because of this. So here we have Islamabad on top, and then Lahore, and our target area in between, right along this subduction zone area. So the first trip, I went via Dubai into Islamabad, which is the capital of Pakistan. It's been the capital only since 1967. If you remember back, I'll talk more. Pakistan got its independence in 1947, and this capital was only built in 1967. It was purpose-built as a capital. If you look on the left-hand picture here, you'll see what it looks like. Everything here is in blocks and squares, quite interesting. So it's in Islamabad, it would be B52 or J22 or something of that order. Everything is blocked off. On the center picture here, you can see the central railway line system. Everything is in squares and blocks. Very, very organized city. You can also see the bottom pictures here, as far as the architecture is concerned, very, very modern. It's really a nice city. It's lying in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains, so a really nice area. The first night I got there, I managed to stay in this hotel, nice 5-star hotel, and accommodation was really, really nice. And I got this impression that this was going to be the sort of accommodation that I was going to experience for the rest of my time in Pakistan. It didn't quite happen that way. The next night we moved to the country, and the hotel accommodation changed a little bit from 5-star to -5-star. Half of the places were falling down, but nevertheless, it kept the rain and the wind out, so we survived this. We organized a trip via the Department of Minerals, and it was a regional director of minerals for that part of Pakistan that accompanied me. When I say accompanied me, he came with his team. Now, it appears in Pakistan, you always include your team when you go out on an excursion. This guy's team consisted of his geologists, I think there were 2 or 3 of them, his surveyor, his secretary, his draftsman. At the end of the day, I think we had about 12 of his staff coming with me on this trip. And of course, out of all the 12 or 14 people on this trip, there was only one guy on this whole trip that was going to do any work. Naturally, in Pakistan, we had to have security. So this bunch of ragtags climbed on and followed us on this trip. My first concern was that I wasn't sure whether the vehicle would be able to go where we were going, and that was my first concern. My second concern was if it did manage to go where we were going and we got attacked or somebody tried to kidnap us, I wasn't quite sure what the bunch of retired security guys was going to do about it. Nevertheless, they were there. We were not allowed to move out of their sight. They stuck to us virtually like glue. In the bottom picture, you can see the bunch of people that came, or some of them that came with the regional director to see how other people worked. The salt range of my first trip there was quite interesting. It's a very, very beautiful area. Very much, I think, about like our Eastern Transvaal area here, what was in Mpumalanga, what is in Mpumalanga. Mountainous, and then of course you drop off this escarpment onto these flat plains leading all the way down to the coast. Structurally, of course, because of these collision of these plates there, very complex, but quite stunning from a geological point of view. And it's a very popular area for people to do all their theses and doctorates on. What I had to come to terms with straight away was in South Africa, our limestones tend to be the softest of the rocks. So we always look for limestones in the valleys, whereas in Pakistan, the limestones are the hardest rock and they form the outcrops and the top of the hills. So I had to get used to looking the other way around. You can see the area, very, very nice, pretty. And there was so much limestone here in South Africa. We are in a really, really deprived area in terms of raw materials for cement. Here, wherever you looked, was limestone cliffs and limestone. Absolutely stunning from my point of view, made my eyes and mouth water. Some of the roads were a little bit hectic, but really, really interesting. Cliffs, all limestone, really good stuff. One of the problems we picked up fairly straight away was, as I said, this is a very, very young limestone. So when you looked at it itself, it was very, very porous, full of shells, full of stuff that we're not used to, and also full of little chert nodules that have grown in here. Now, that immediately started ringing bells because you know that chert nodules and soft stuff don't go very well with diamond drilling. So we started discounting diamond drilling on that first episode. The next thing we look at really is the project establishment. When I got back from Pakistan, we started looking at this. And the first thing that I had learned in Pakistan, that Pakistan was a country with a very, very corrupt administration. Not too unlike us over here. So we went ahead and appointed a CEO for the project. And because of what we said, the friend happened to be a friend of the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister's name was Nawaz Sharif. So we appointed one of his friends as our CEO for obvious reasons. We also then appointed a country manager who happened to be just the retired Minister of Mines. So we started collecting important people around the project. We applied for a mining lease, and because of the first two guys in this thing, it was applied for and granted, 13th of March. Not only was it a prospecting lease, we were granted a mining lease straight over. We then had to go ahead and start appointing exploration team, geologists and stuff like that. And the idea we had was that we would take myself over and one geologist from South Africa, and then possibly take one geologist in Pakistan who knew the local geology. When we advertised for a geologist in Pakistan, we were absolutely inundated with guys. There are geologists falling out of every tree at every university, and every one of them applied for this job. Reason being that not one of them has ever worked on a project before. So they just simply stay at university, no mining projects in the country, and simply get more and more degrees behind their name. At the end of the day, instead of taking one, we took on these 4 geologists, all way better qualified than myself, but we were quite happy to, and they were quite happy to come just to be able to add something to their CV as a project they had worked on. We started collecting guys from the prospecting side, and again, we were totally inundated with people. I think you have to realize that Pakistan is a country with very little job opportunities, and everybody wanted to be in on this little project. Now, we planned, and we did take eventually some guys from South Africa. These are the guys circled. The one on the very right was the other geologist that I took with me. And the guy in the front at the bottom, he was our health and safety guy. The 2 guys in the center were from the drilling team, not actually part of me, but I'll talk a little bit about the drilling team later. All these guys, as you can see, are quite young. And it is interesting, I don't think that there is a single one of them that had ever had any sort of job before. No jobs before. So they had spent their lives up to this age without having ever worked a day. The guy on the left here is an interesting guy. He was, in actual fact, a fully qualified mining engineer. He was only too happy to take this job as a laborer because he had never worked, but he was a qualified mining engineer, and he was quite a good laborer as well. We then decided it's time to survey the area, and got a bit of a surprise because we've discovered that because of the security situation in Pakistan, no aerial surveying was permitted. So all of this had to be done virtually in the field, which took quite a long time to sort out to get the area surveyed. Then we came to the appointment of a drill contractor. We decided that we would look at not look at diamond drilling, but we tried it out because there were no RC drills available in Pakistan. So we got the diamond driller out who told us he would drill the stuff with no problem. And in the cement industry, we require pretty much 100% recovery. We are not allowed or cannot allow material to be taken out because we do not know what the full quality of the material is that we're going to mine. So we stuck this diamond drill in, and on the right you can see his core recovery. That box should have been full, and we were just getting slush out, which was as we had expected. So the answer was that diamond drilling was not going to work. So we went back to the RC drilling side, because that's more or less what we always use in South Africa. Nothing was available in Pakistan. Nothing was available in India or any country around there. We ended up having to come back to South Africa. We used a company here, Talk Drilling, and eventually convinced them to equip a rig and to ship it over to Pakistan for us. So this rig was built up and shipped all the way to Pakistan to work there. The next thing we had to look at was the appointment of an ISO accredited laboratory to do our chemical analysis, because of course that's the most important part of what we were doing. As a matter of interest, we eventually had 7,609 samples for full chemical analysis. There was not a single laboratory in the whole of Pakistan that was ISO accredited and that could handle the samples that we were looking at. So again, we had to turn to South Africa and appoint a South African company, and I'll show you later, we had to fly all the samples out to South Africa. The result of all this here was that we had a long delay, and the exploration drilling only started on about the 20th of March 2015. Let's have a look a bit at the raw material evaluation then. Starting off, we needed to get some accommodation and we needed to sort our security out. We were quite lucky. There was a hotel, and if you look at the name, a wonderful name, the Grand Imperial Hotel, which was in the area in a small village close to us. What we did is we took over the hotel for the complete year. And because of security, what we had to do is we closed off the entire bottom floor. On the top floor there were, excuse me, on the top floor there were 10 rooms, which was just enough for us. Bottom floor was completely sealed off, and that's where the security guys lived. And we lived on the top floor from a security point of view. Now, just remember that name, Grand Imperial. I'll talk a little bit later about the love that Pakistanis have for British things. Security was quite something here. We had to appoint our own security team, and they had to, or the senior guy there, had to report back on our movements every single day. Every day he had to report to his headquarters where we were, what we were doing, and whether or not we were safe. Their fear apparently is that there's a fear of kidnapping, of extortion, kidnapping of particularly business people. Mainly if you're an American, I think you're in trouble. But this was their main concern. So we had to learn to live with security. And everywhere we went, well, this is what happened. We had these guys. If you stopped and popped into a shopping center, you had these guys with you all the time. So we got to learn to live a little bit like royalty, where you just couldn't do anything in the field. If you wanted to pop in to the bush, you had these security guys walking with you. So it was something we eventually started getting used to. And we had to buy vehicles there, to equip vehicles for transport, and these were the buckies we had at our hotel. Now, the way that you had to travel there was this way. You had to have 4 seats in the back of the bucky, in which you had your 4 armed security guards, and you always traveled in convoy, at least 2 vehicles, sometimes 3 vehicles, with your fully armed guys around you. When we used to get to site, you would stop and you would drop the guys off, and they would surround the whole area in which you were working, and that's the way they spent their day, patrolling the area around where you were working. Quite something to have to get used to as a South African. The little hotel itself, we eventually equipped the top floor quite nicely and had our dining room and etc. And the one problem we had to come up with is the food in Pakistan. Because they seriously believe that the hotter the food is in terms of spices, the better it is. So we eventually had to try to train a cook to avoid him or stop him putting chilies into everything that he had. And even whatever egg you had a scrambled egg, it was full of chilies. And it was quite a job to convince these guys, because they could not understand why you didn't want a handful of chilies in everything you ate. As far as alcohol was concerned, my very first trip was a dry trip, very dry trip, because as you come into Pakistan, there's a big sign saying the importation of alcohol is forbidden. And it is a dry country, being a Muslim country. So on the second trip I went through, I decided, being a typical South African, to take a chance. And I stuck a bottle of whiskey in my suitcase. When I arrived in the airport in Islamabad, the porter who was picking up my luggage came along and said, the custom guys would like to have a word with you. So I thought, uh-oh, here we go. Anyway, went along, and the guys looked me up and down and said, is this your suitcase? And I said, yes. They said, is this your bottle in the suitcase? I said, yes. They said, okay, that's fine. Then I discovered that as long as I wasn't a Muslim, it was fine for me to bring alcohol in. They didn't seem to mind. So after that, we used to import all of our alcohol through my trips backwards and forwards. And this little dining room also became our pub. We managed to take over a little school in the area and converted that into our offices. And we soon learned how to dress properly for evenings that we went out and went out for dinner. Fieldwork. When our RC drill eventually arrived, we were able to start, and it all worked very well. Sampling was absolutely fantastic. This drill, because of the soft material, it just churned its way through the stuff, and we were able to get full samples and very happy with those. This is just the setup we had. Temperatures pretty hot most of the year, so we had to have shade and sort ourselves out. Now, all of our exploration, because it was going to be a feasibility study, was carried out in accordance with the JORC Code of Exploration Reporting. You all know that's the Joint Ore Reserve Committee code. And we had to appoint a competent person, which we appointed SRK in South Africa. So they used to pop over occasionally just to ensure that our whole methods of sampling were all 100% and there was no biasing in our sampling systems. What we did, the RC drill would we would pour out the sample into the cyclone, collect the material, and every single meter was sampled, every single meter was weighed, and the scales had to be cleaned and calibrated after every hole just to comply with the JORC code. The samples were then all riffled, and in the beginning there was a concern that we may have a biasing of a sample because of, if you look on top there, you'll see some of the dust material coming out of the drill. So the concern was, by losing some dust, are we in any way biasing the sample? So initially we had to have dust collectors and collect all that sample and then compare them to the other sample. And the answer was luckily that there was no biasing of that sample, so we didn't have to worry. But those are the things we had to do to ensure the sampling was correct. Riffling the plies through, and then of course we had our geologists who used to log all the core. They were very luckily quite expert in that area, knew exactly where we were in that formation all the time, which was a great help. Samples were then packed and sampled with numbers top and bottom, just in case something got lost. And then these all had to be packed into a DHL bag, and this was then air freighted to South Africa, to Undertook in South Africa for full chemical analysis. Quite a process. So we actually sent 7,609 samples of 2 kilograms, 15,000 kilograms we had to air freight to South Africa for full chemical analysis. The duplicate samples, of course, we had to keep on site for future reference. The drilling went very well. We occasionally had very hot days, and we also had very wet days. With the Wet days, of course, we had the normal fun of getting the stuff moving, but very generally, I've never had a job that's gone quite as smoothly as this. It really went wonderfully well. As far as the drilling was concerned, we did it in 2 phases. The first phase, and this is what we would normally do in the cement industry, we drilled on a grid of 400 by 100 meters over the area. We drilled 42 holes, about 90 meters per hole. The reason we didn't drill much deeper than that was because we were going to have a surface mine. We felt that about 190 to 100 meters would be as deep as we would go. Phase 2, we then came back and we infilled between those to give us a final grid of 200 meters along strike by 50 meters down dip. So we really pumped this area full of holes, another 44 holes, about 72 meters on average. Just to give you an idea of the geology of the area, these are mainly all limestones outcropping here that you can see. They are the different formations that we were going through, the Sakazar, the Namel, and the Chorgli. And over here you can see the holes in rows and all very close. So we really drilled this thing full of holes and really satisfied us, and that worked very well. The resource, according to the whole JORC classification, we had a measured resource of 126 million, indicated of 108, and an inferred of 92. So more than enough for what we needed in terms of a cement plant in that country. I'm going to talk a little bit about Pakistan in general, if you're okay with that. The people, first of all. Then the roads and the transport, something about the salt mining in the area we were in, something about the historical sites. The people. You're probably all aware, but the British ruled India, and that includes Pakistan, from 1858 to 1947. That was 89 years. The interesting thing was Pakistan has preserved British infrastructure. They are pedantic about it. Every rail, road, whatever the British put in, Pakistans have kept. They've built on it. Some of the rail stations we went into were incredible. They were probably still dated 18 something because they were the old-fashioned switchgear system, but they all still worked and they were all still being maintained. The water systems we looked after. Here we are, and we're sitting up between Islamabad and Lahore on the top. This area we were in is known as the Punjab. Now, the Punjab literally means 5 rivers, and these are the 5 rivers, the Indus, the Jhelum, and etc., flowing through the area. On the right-hand picture, you can see all the blue. Now, the blue is the irrigated area. So most of Pakistan is irrigated, and this is all because of British canals and British engineers that did all this in the days of India being controlled by the British. The interesting thing, again, is that the Pakistanis have maintained these. They've kept them. They've built on them, and the system is wonderful. It's the largest irrigation system in the world, and without that, Pakistan would starve. It's a wonderful garden all the way through. We drove through from the Salt Range to Lahore, and this is what you drove through all the time. Absolutely beautiful gardens and vegetable patches all the way. 14.4 million hectares of cultivated land. Obviously, the water from all those 5 rivers is plentiful. The rail as well. Everywhere you went, the rail systems were working. They were wonderful. And some of these rails are incredible, through mountains, etc. So it was quite a fascinating thing to go to some of the rail areas. Now, the other thing, and Pakistanis generally believe that British goods are best. It's quite a strange thing. I mentioned to you earlier, just look at the hotel's name, that Imperial. Everything in Pakistan that has a British name is revered. It's quite strange. And everybody told us, if you want to produce cement or product, make sure that you name it something British. Don't think that you can call it a local name because the locals won't buy it. They all want British. British stuff is good. So strange, very different to what we are used to here in Southern Africa. Pakistan itself is of course Muslim, and it's 98% Muslim. 98% Muslim. Total population in Pakistan is 204 million. And the population density 287 per square kilometer. India, right next door to that, is quite different. It's a population of 1.35 billion. 1.35 billion in India. Population is 14% Muslim in India. So there are as many Muslims in India as there are in the Muslim state of Pakistan. The population density of Pakistan is 287 and India is 400. Hell of a lot more. So, and you can actually see that. I've been to both countries. Traveling around in Pakistan, you never got the impression of abject poverty. You didn't get the impression of people on top of each other all the time. Whereas in India was very, very different. Just a matter of interest, those 400 people per square and 287. South Africa is 49, just to give you some idea of the population. The people themselves, on the area that we were working, we had a whole lot of these little adits for coal mining. And these guys, you couldn't walk past them without them inviting you to come in or come and chat. They were the friendliest, happiest people, which always made us wonder why we had all the security, because these guys were lovely people. They couldn't stop wanting to chat to you. Now, our security guys, of course, had a problem trying to keep these people away because we wanted to talk, and they wanted to talk, and so it went on. These are the sort of local guys in the area, and they would all see us, all come up, find out about us, where we were. And invariably what they would do is say, please take tea, come and take tea. Now, that's another British thing of taking tea. When you decided to go and take tea, this is what you ended up with. Obviously no alcohol, but certainly a hell of a lot more than just tea. And you had these spreads, and this was taking tea with some guys. You can see in the background, of course, our security guys sitting there, but this is taking tea in Pakistan, which happened quite frequently. I want to talk a little bit about this guy. He's a geologist that I took with from South Africa. Now, he's a big guy. And in Pakistan, they do not see Black Africans. It's an absolute rarity. The result was wherever we went, he attracted a huge crowd of people. Everybody in Pakistan wanted to have their photograph taken with him. Our security guys would have to try and ward everybody off. They all wanted to touch him, all wanted to come. And of course, he didn't object at all. He thought this was the absolute best thing ever to be so popular. They also had this heritage thing, and everybody that had fought for the British in the last wars were revered. And here's a case of a little village and a heritage of a gun, and was awarded to this entire village. And this is all revered. And I'm just mentioning this because it's very different to what we have, where in this country we try to destroy everything that refers to the past. Here, somehow they've actually revered it. One of the sad things we always came across was in the area we were working was this point, or this referral back to the partitioning of 1947. We found huge amounts of these Hindu graves, and for some reason they wanted to build them on top of hills. The limestone, of course, forming the hills. It became quite a problem for us to have to survey and try and work our way around all these graves. But just as a matter of sadness, really, the partition of 1947 resulted in a bit of a confusing figure, 200,000 to 2 million deaths, and it displaced 14 million people. And you come across this reminder all the time in those countries of this partition. As far as the team of guys were, I have never ever worked with a group of people like this in my life. They were the most accommodating, best team I've ever had. It was quite amazing. These guys would kill for you. They were incredible. I never, in the entire time we worked in Pakistan, had a single guy that didn't pitch up for work. I never had a single guy off sick. I had, during the one period when we were drilling, we had Ramadan came up, and that was in the middle of summer, 47, 48 degrees. And these guys continued working, and we just couldn't carry on with that heat working. So we eventually asked them how we can solve the problem. They came up with the solution: why don't we start earlier? Now, in summer, the sun comes up quite early. So 4:30 in the morning, we started work. We could work through to lunchtime, and then they could have the afternoon off, because not allowed to drink or eat during daylight hours. What we also did was we would strategically position some water tanks around the place in the bush, and they could then sneak off when they went to the bush and have a sip of water just to keep them going. But never in that entire month of Ramadan did we lose 1 hour of drilling time. They were quite incredible. The other strange thing too was the affection that these guys show you. It's quite embarrassing sometimes, but every time that I used to leave to come to South Africa, come back home, every single guy had to come, shake my hand, and give me a hug. I would then head off back, and that included all the security guys. And then when I came back from South Africa, the whole process again, shake hands, give you a hug. And it was quite a long process, but it just showed you these guys who were really so appreciative of what we were doing for them. It was very rewarding indeed. Look a little bit at the roads and transport in the country. The road system is pretty good. Again, I mentioned it's part of the British heritage, and they've continued with it. This is the main road from Lahore to Pakistan, going through the Salt Range. Really nice, 3 lanes each side. Really good road system going through. Occasionally, you would come across some other systems and people of other transport as well, which were, again, always having a chat, always wanting to see you. Everybody in Pakistan drives their own private trucks. There's very few trucking companies. So in the cement industry, the guys that transport the cement are these guys. And no driver of any truck in Pakistan would be seen dead in an undecorated truck. Every truck is decorated to the hilt. And the more decorations, I'm not sure, the better they feel. But everything is manual. So you go to the cement plant and this truck is loaded by hand. It is offloaded by hand. Everything is done by hand. You know, these trucks are, they're amazing what they come up with, these decorations, and also including the buses. Now, I'm always amazed that the driver of the bus can actually see out of this bus. I don't know how he does. And if you notice on top of that bus, you'll see a little railing. There's some seats on top of that bus, and the reason for seats on top is as the bus fills up, so mainly the men end up sitting in the nice cool air on top of this bus. The other problem area in Pakistan is these things, tuk-tuks, and they actually have now been banned in Islamabad itself because they cause chaos in the traffic. And if you want to see how many people can fit on a tuk-tuk, well, I think there was something like 20-something. And that's almost as bad as one of these little mopeds. They seem to get about 10 people on a moped as well. We came across some of the road building in this area, and I'm going back to this thing of labor and people working. And on the left-hand side, you can see the guys are busy trying to build a road, which eventually, by the time we left, was actually tarred. But this is the way they build a road. By hand, the guy sits and he chips the rocks and he packs it. And there's hundreds of people, and that's their job. They sit and they pack every rock in here by hand. And as I said, eventually it was a tarred road. Salt mining. Now, obviously the Salt Range had a salt mine. Now, I said it was discovered by Alexander the Great in about 320 BC. His horses licking the stuff. And the British, when they came over there, Britain started putting a great value on the salt. So they had the Salt Act of 82 that prohibited any Indians, of course, in Pakistani, from collecting or selling salt. And here we have the Salt Range with probably the biggest supply of salt in the world, and no Indians were allowed to have or carry salt. So this was one of the worst things the British ever brought in. And that was all obviously to control salt tax, etc. Absolutely terrible law. Close to us was the Khewra salt mine, and that was opened in 1892. It's the second largest salt mine in the world. It has a reserve of 6.6 billion tons, and they produce 1,500 tons per day. It's all produced by hand. Everything is by hand. We set off on a Sunday to go and visit the site because it's quite a tourist attraction, and we had our 3 vehicles. And when we passed through the first little village, the police there decided they had nothing to do, so they would come with us. So we ended up with our 3 vehicles plus 2 police vehicles. The embarrassing part was the 2 police vehicles had sirens. So they would travel in front of us with their sirens blaring, and every time we came to a little village, they'd go ahead of us, and stop all the traffic. So here we were, just feeling like Zuma, going through these little villages with the sirens blaring. When we arrived at the salt mine, there was a whole class, a couple of classes of school kids coming out of this. They'd just been for a visit. And here we arrived with sirens blaring, etc. And these guys somehow must have thought we were very, very important people, because they all wanted their photographs taken with us and our autographs, etc. The salt mine itself is, as I said, quite a tourist attraction. So you can go through sections of it, and it's actually quite stunning going through this and just looking at this. And it's a very, very red-colored salt, beautiful stuff to look at. And they obviously also make a lot of ornaments and carvings, etc., out of all the salt. On the right-hand side, you can see an interesting thing. There's a cannon sitting there. Now, the little sign behind it says this cannon used to be used in the old times to shoot the hanging loose. I just hope the guys were accurate enough. I wouldn't like to be there when somebody tries to shoot some hanging loose there. Historical sites in the area we were in, very close to us, our offices are just on the left there, was this, the Katas Raj Hindu temple. Now, of course, being a Hindu temple, there are virtually no Hindus. They're all in India. So this place was virtually abandoned, but it was quite a stunning place, and we visited it a few times. The story is that it's the lake is called the Ramtir Lake, and that apparently, according to Hindu religion, is part of Shiva's, the god Shiva's tears that fell into this lake. But it is really a stunning area, and some of the areas around us were really beautiful in terms of this historic site. Beautiful, beautiful old buildings. And this lake apparently has never, ever been dried. Following on the geological exploration, there were a whole lot of other stuff that we required in the feasibility study. And I'm not going to go through those in detail because they are pretty much another subject. But we had to then do a full market survey of the area. We had to fully design the brand new cement plant, complete mining plans, etc. Then the environmental management plan, of course, financial plans, and we finished all those on the 17th of March 2017. Now, where are we currently on this project? Well, in 2017, remember we had friends called the Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif. Well, the Prime Minister was removed from office as a result of what you may remember, the Panama Papers. That's in 2017. In 2018, he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. Imran Khan, the cricketer, became the new Prime Minister of Pakistan. And many, many previous agreements with the government have been cancelled. The environmental management plan that we have completed and submitted has still not been approved. And unfortunately, it looks as if we had backed the wrong horse. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, if they are.
Thank you very much, Evan. Any questions, everybody? Just raise your hand or unmute yourself and speak.
Fantastic. Thanks, Evan. That was great. Questions?
It's so untechnical, I'm sure there can't be questions.
No.
Evan, what
I'm going to
about
ask a
the
very
other
technical
materials
question.
that
Did you see a lot of chili plants in the area?
Did we see what?
There have a lot of chili plantations in that garden area.
No, we didn't really. But as I did mention, I think on the cement presentation, the cement plant, the ones we went to there, were using chicken shit as part of their alternative materials instead of coal. That's the amount of chickens that are around. The other thing of interest too is that if you go out there, everything is chicken. Chicken this, everything. If you don't like chicken, you have a problem. And if you want beef, there's plenty of beef, but nobody eats beef. And it's not because of a religion, it's because they don't eat beef. So beef is actually wonderful. So we used to go out and have beautiful steaks, but nobody else would eat them. So if you went out, you got chicken. If you went to a restaurant, you could get beef, which was really good.
Evan, this is John speaking here.
Yes, John.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed seeing limestones, and I'm really coming from the sedimentologist or the carbon geologist side. And carbonate is, that's what we explore in the oil industry. And I just had a nice experience as recent as probably 9 months or so ago. I was involved with an offshore project, offshore the Orange River mouth. So that's in the Northern Orange Basin, where we managed to follow the carbonates or the limestones. So this is Jurassic, early Cretaceous age, all along the coast from Angola. It's prolific oil-carrying reservoirs there. And we've managed to follow it as far south as into South Africa. That's in the offshore. So that's my little contribution to your limestone story. Thank you.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
Thank you. Adrian, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Evan, thanks very much. Can you explain to me why a country with such nice people, such friendly people, such educated people, good infrastructure, etc., has such a lousy government?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't like to say maybe ditto here, but
I hadn't thought of that.
It's amazing. I don't understand that either. It's such a corrupt system there. As I said, when we brought, for example, that drill through, the one we had in South Africa, to get that thing through their system there it took bribes, it took all sorts of stuff. And I think maybe when you end up in such poor poverty countries, people all start relying on underhand deals. They all start relying on, as soon as they have a position of power, they rely on that position to be able to extort something. But that's why we had to appoint people like we did. And it's just to get through all the red tape, because every guy stands and they all want a reason to do something. They want a reason to do their job. I don't know why. And the same thing seems to follow through all the way to the government.
Yeah, it's sad.
It is very sad, because, as I said, the people themselves are absolutely wonderful people. Really were. It's made you feel so good that people with so little. We had many times a guy would come and work, and he'd come along and he'd give you some sweets. What for? No, he just wants to give you some, give you something. He couldn't afford to do anything, but that's the way they were. And it was, one of the things I've always said is amazing is that you only know what you know about a country from what? From the media. That's what you know about it. And my impression when I went there from the media wasn't a particularly good impression. And that's because what does the media show you? They show you all the bad things. That's what they're there for. So when you go and you see some of the good things, it's different. And very often I'd go and people would say, what the hell are you going to Pakistan for? Aren't you scared? And I'd say, well, when I'm there and I see the South African news, I get quite scared. And that's it. What you see in the news is not what is actually there.
Yeah.
Evan, just John Brister here, and there's a question. Sorry, there's a question being raised. Is that cement factory still needed, or will it happen, or won't it happen?
That's a very good question. I'll be very, very happy if it does, because I have quite a bit of share and thing. But I doubt it. What's happening now, of course, is this the whole economic corridor is partially built. The Gwadar port has been virtually completed. There are sections which are going ahead. India, of course, always will oppose it, because India doesn't want anything to do with Pakistan. So India is vehemently opposing that, particularly through Kashmir. They're trying to stall all sorts of things to stop that route going through Kashmir. So that is happening. So there are all these other sideline things that are occurring. But the Chinese just throw people and money at things, so it probably will go ahead. As far as our project is concerned, gee whiz, I wish it would, but I don't know. And that, again, will be a political game if somebody can twist somebody's arm. But at the moment, obviously, it's the boot is in the wrong foot. We back the wrong people.
Yeah, well, again, just carrying on. I mean, it was always interesting. Willard Mbalaka, who was your big black geologist, would always say that, he just had a lovely time in Pakistan, and his experiences on the ground there were just so totally different from what we all see on the press. and you know, and diverting as well. Bob Woolmer, who was a close friend, the cricketer, likewise said, you know, the wonderful time he had in Pakistan. And the last observation, I guess Toyota is the name of the game, is it?
Well, yeah. Yeah. You certainly don't find any Hyundais there.
Yeah.
There's actually an interesting thing too, is this whole dislike, or really a hatred, I suppose, of Hindus and Muslims there. And it was quite a difficult thing to come to grips with. Why? And it's just a pure religious thing, because they are the same people.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, guys, if there of you want to listen to this talk again or pass it on to somebody, it's going to be there for a limited time only, because we've got limited storing space on the cloud. Thank you very much, Evan.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Evan.
No more.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thanks, Evan. That was great.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right,
Thanks,
it's
guys.
raining like
Cheers.
mad here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's why
Good
we had
stuff.
a brief cut off on the clip along the way, but it's good. Well done.
Okay, thanks. Sir.
Bye
Thank
now.
you then.
Cheers, Evan.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Mate,
Ciao.
Cheers,
to
bye.
see you again.
Thanks,
Thanks.